Well, guys, thanks for joining me. Thanks for finding our wonderful little secluded hideaway. I do appreciate the fact that we could look up and see that it's still not raining. This has been an actually very nice day of weather for once. You guys have probably noticed, and you and I were talking about this before we started here today, this mobile thing has kind of been sneaking up on us. You know, in a lot of organizations, it started with an executive request here, and this is how things seem to start in most companies. As a VP goes and buys a new phone and brings it in and says, "You support this," and then we got to figure out what the heck that means. So they kind of crept in that way, and a lot of companies today are actually saying, you know what, we're really not comfortable with where BlackBerry is. We think they're pretty much going to go out of business, and that seems to kind of be the trajectory they're on. And we've got this app that marketing just sort of threw together because they felt like they needed to have something, and IT's probably not even aware of it. We're in a position now where we really can't hide from the fact that mobile's kind of a big deal, and we need answers here. Now, a lot of vendors are going to try to come to you and say, "Hey, no problem, we can make that go away. We got this magic fairy dust. If you just give us a huge chunk of money, we'll make your mobile problem disappear." And I'm afraid to say that doesn't exist. You're going to need to build some skills in this space. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about here today. Now, I'm going to give you guys some stats, and like I said yesterday, I'm not doing this because I feel like I need to convince you. I'm doing this because I know in my organization particularly, I still have to convince people. I sprinkle these into every conversation I have with anybody, even if it's not about mobile. I like throwing this stuff in there just to kind of shock their system a little bit, because this is really a big deal. The growth here is just off the charts. Android activations have been outpacing baby births seemingly since the beginning of Android. Well, not quite, it took a little while, but I mean, at this point, we're activating somewhere around 1 million Android devices every day. There's something like 300,000 kids that are born every day. iPhones also far outstrip supply here when it comes to kids being born. Now, eventually everybody's going to have one of these things, but we're looking at a market, guys, where 300 million smartphones are sold every quarter. 300 million. That's a lot. We've got about 1.5 billion of these things floating around in the world right now. Sometime later this year, perhaps next year, actually we'll have more numbers here in about 2 hours. Apple's set to have an event, and so they're going to spout all sorts of interesting things, I'm sure, about where they're at. iOS is going to hit 1 billion units probably next year, maybe late this year. I guess we'll see. My money's at this point really on 2015, unless they say something really revolutionary today. About 1 billion smartphones, a little more than that, are being sold annually right now. And that's pretty crazy. So the next time somebody says, "Well, we don't really need to worry about that, we're a technology company," you might want to ask them which of these billion people they don't want to take money from. Now, this has been this way for quite a while. You go back to 2011, Apple was selling more iOS devices in that single year than they did Macs in the previous 28 years. That still kind of blows my mind, because Apple's like one of the only PC companies that's actually seen growth in the PC sales over the last several years. We got 500 million iTunes accounts floating right now. They all have a credit card backing them. I think Apple Pay actually has an opportunity to be a pretty big deal here too, because it's going to make it very, very easy for somebody to give you money without having to worry about someone taking their credit card number. In the US, we've had Target got hacked, and that was about 100 million credit cards that got replaced. I mean, basically, there's a pretty good chance if you're a US citizen, you've had your credit card replaced in the last few months. Because shortly after the Target hack was reported, Home Depot got hacked for another 46 million credit cards, or some crazy number. So lots and lots of people have gotten new credit cards thanks to hacking. We've got north of 800 million iOS units right now. Again, we'll probably get better numbers here in a couple hours. Sorry that I couldn't go into the future, get those numbers and come back and tell you to them now. We've had just north of 1 billion Android activations. The really hard part with the Android number is we don't get anything out of China or India, because those don't talk to Google services. So there's another pool of at least another couple hundred million that kind of are hidden from us. They're there, but we don't necessarily know exactly how big that is, so it's very speculative. This kind of gives you a sense of the scale, how quickly we went from essentially 0 to 1 billion, and this took about 4 years. When you consider that it took us almost 3 decades, more than 3 decades, to get to 1 billion in terms of PCs, the fact that we're able to do that in the mobile space in less than half a decade is pretty remarkable. All right, so again, to kind of give you a sense of this, we're talking about 1 billion Windows PCs, about 2.2 billion internet users. So this implies we've got a market that's already bigger than the PC market. We've got almost everybody that gets online today can, or probably can, do so from a little rectangle of glass. Now, a lot of folks said, well, Windows 8 is going to totally turn that on its ear. Everyone's going to rush right out and buy a new PC. That really hasn't happened. 2012 alone, there were more Android devices sold than Windows devices. That's pretty crazy to me. Even though iPad sales have kind of trended down a little bit of late, there's various sort of arguments over what's actually happening there. There are more iPads sold each quarter than we were selling PCs back when Windows 95 was a big deal. So that gives you a sense of just how much growth we're seeing in this space. You can make a very compelling argument that Windows had almost the entirety of the market back in 2008 or so, and that's not that long ago, about 6 years, if I can do math in my brain here. By the end of 2012, they were down to 30. They very recently came out and said, you know what, actually it's like 14. This is their own slide. Although interestingly enough, when they posted this slide deck, they removed this slide. I thought that was kind of funny. It was like the one slide they chose not to share. But they tried it, and I give them credit, they're trying to put this in a positive light. Look at the size of the opportunity we have. We can only go up from here. But this also shows you how quickly the mighty have fallen. All right, so again, to kind of give you another look at this, here's PC sales, and then all of a sudden here comes this whole mobile thing. And the real challenge for us is most of us kind of grew up with this PC. And we've got about 30 years of learning, 30 years of baggage that we need to kind of put aside, because the rules for these things are different than the rules for these things. What does that mean to us? But the fact that essentially in 7 years, actually even less than about 4 years for it to overtake PCs, but you look at how quickly those graphs got flipped. To me, that's just amazing. When Ben first tweeted this, there was a little bit of controversy. I was like, oh my God, you gotta be kidding me. And he did this about a year ago now, and it's very clear that we have crossed over that gap. I haven't really seen anything that would contradict that at this point. So we're already in that world, at least as far as I'm concerned. He's posted a bunch of different things in this space. I love this chart. Again, when this first came out, a lot of people were like, wow, you gotta be kidding me. But clearly, you look at the trajectory there, which line's going up, which line's going down. That's where we're at. This was actually a pretty big deal when he tweeted this out, because this was the first time, and this is just the iOS ecosystem, they tripped over the Windows PC numbers. This was kind of one of those first indicators that, geez, the Windows thing really is starting to kind of collapse on itself. People are moving towards these other ecosystems, and what does that mean for us? Now, a lot of folks have tried to say, well, it's not really a big deal, because growth is kind of stalling now, and it isn't. Every week, 500,000 people say goodbye to their dumb phone, and they buy a smartphone. Now, they don't all treat their smartphone like a smartphone. They don't all use it the way we use our smartphones. I realize how dependent I am on this thing when I travel internationally, because when I show up, I get that text message that reminds me, if I dare use my phone, I'm going to pay this ridiculous sum of money for every freaking meg of data that I use. I actually bought a plan for this trip so that I actually have this very small little bucket of data, and I've been just sipping off it to the point where I really do need to kind of like gorge tonight so that I can use it up, because it'll expire at the end of the month anyway, so I might as well use it. Took us about 16 years to get to these first billion in the smartphone space. The next billion is going to take 3, and we're about halfway through that. Okay, so in about a year and a half or so from now, we can expect that we'll hit that 2 billion. We got about 3.2 billion mobile subscribers in the world. In fact, there actually is a mobile subscription for every person on Earth. Not every person on Earth has a mobile subscription, because some people have multiples, but that's the kind of scope we're talking about here. And 1 billion of these folks have come online just in the last 4 years, with another 4 billion that are yet to come. And believe me, they're going to come online by using a rectangle of glass, not some fancy MacBook Pro. We already live in this world. And certainly, even when Ben first put this picture together, if you included tablets into that mix, it was already over the line. And so you can make a lot of different arguments based on how you cherry pick the data. But no matter how you look at it, it's very clear that people are gravitating towards these various shapes of rectangles of glass and away from their PCs. It's the traditional PC. All right, so I'm very much of the opinion we're already there. We already live in a world where there are more mobile devices than humans. I think in my house right now there are 7 iPhones, 2 iPads, and 3 people. And I've gotten to the point now where every time I get a new iPhone, last 2 years, my wife has given me a lot of grief about that. She's like, you need to get rid of some of the old ones. I'm like, but they're like historical artifacts. She's not buying that. That's right. So we're already in that world. Last October, Apple told us they hit the 60 billion download number. I'm very interested to see if they give us any updates on that here today, because I can guarantee you that number's gone up. Right. December alone, they moved 3 billion units. And so they moved a lot of apps in that December timeframe. It's pretty crazy. This is kind of a comparison of the App Store versus Google Play. Now, it took a little while for Google to kind of catch up in that market, but at this point, you could argue it's pretty much equal. Now, I don't know that it's necessarily true in the quality of the applications, certainly not in terms of how much has been paid out or how much people are willing to pay, but there's a lot of downloads here. The download numbers are just through the roof. We're somewhere north of 150 billion downloads total right now, 150 billion. Now, the reason I like to bring this up is I've had a lot of arguments with some of my peers about native apps versus the mobile web. And I've got a lot of people who think, well, the mobile web is going to win. It's all about mobile web, mobile web, mobile web, mobile web. So, well, that's great, but how do you explain the fact there's 150 billion downloads? Doesn't that kind of imply that people like their apps? Now, not all of these are actually being used every day. I think the best number I've seen is somewhere over 24, about 27, 28 apps actually get used every month on an average phone. So that implies there's a lot of apps that just kind of sit there 7, 8, 9 pages deep on somebody's phone they never touch. Maybe they go delete it, maybe they don't. Monthly download rates right now, though, are 9 times McDonald's burger sales. Now, I'm not going to argue that McDonald's has high-class hamburgers, but they move a lot of units. And the fact that we have a significantly stronger appetite for downloads should be very telling. Typical device these days has several dozen apps on it. Again, not all are used on a regular basis. Many, frankly, never get launched or only get launched once or twice, played with for a few minutes, and then ignored. There's a significant amount of money has been paid out here. We're talking billions and billions of dollars. This is a non-trivial amount of money. A lot of arguments over whether there's really a sustainable ecosystem here for developers. And I don't have a whole lot of great news in that space. I mean, it's clear app prices are trending lower and lower, and there's a lot of sort of discussion about, can indie developers actually make it? The gold rush is clearly over. The era where, hey, look, I got a hit game and I'm a multimillionaire, that game is done. But I still think there's room for sustainable businesses, lifestyle businesses. We'll see. This is pretty interesting comparison of song downloads versus app downloads. And this is changing a little bit now as people download less music. They go more to subscription services. But for a long time, it's been at least a 2-to-1 ratio. And this is another way of looking at it. You can see books are kind of this little blip at the bottom nobody really pays much attention to because there's not a whole lot there. But for a very long period of time here, it's been at least a 2-to-1 ratio of apps and music. And that ratio is getting bigger, somewhat related to people downloading less music, but also because people are downloading more apps. In the US, mobile web usage doubled since 2009 and has grown again, especially as LTE has rolled out. People have faster internet connections. In fact, I know some people who, they don't actually have a home internet connection anymore. They just use their phones for everything. They just tether. That's the easiest way for them to do it. Yahoo claims 400 million monthly users. I don't know how to feel about that number, because I'm like, people use Yahoo? But I think this is Yahoo weather. And whether or not that's still going to be 400 million now that iOS 8 is out and has replaced Yahoo weather with Weather Channel's weather data, I'm not sure how that's going to play out. More than half of Facebook's user base right now is mobile, so that's well north of 500 million people. The vast majority of US Facebook users, at least, are mobile. I would not be surprised if that's any different anywhere else, quite frankly. I don't think that's a US only type of thing. Most iOS users have the Facebook app, and a decent number of Android do as well. Amazon's doing more than $1 billion of sales on mobile devices. That's not a small amount of money by any stretch. Smartphone sales have been outpacing computer sales for more than a year now. I don't think that's too surprising. A lot of folks are getting a new phone every other year, every year in some cases. Most people are not replacing their laptop every 2 years. Maybe not even every 3, every 4. Now this does kind of pose an interesting dynamic. What happens when most of us are carrying smartphones, and when will that actually happen? It's pretty clear we are in that world now, where we've easily tipped over the 50% mark, and we've been there now for a while. When we'll hit saturation is still somewhat up for debate. So saturation is when you can expect that someone you run into on the street has a smartphone, and that it would be almost abnormal for them not to. Perfect example of a saturated thing would be a refrigerator. If you went to somebody's house and they didn't have a refrigerator, that would be strange. Everybody has that kind of a product, at least in the developed countries. So if you run into somebody on the street, probably next year at some point, in the US as well as here in Europe, you're going to see that. You're going to expect that people have smartphones. Again, they won't all use them like smartphones. They won't all use them the way we use smartphones, right? But that's going to happen. That to me is going to be the really interesting next big shift, is what happens when people wake up to the fact they have a computer in their pocket. What will that enable? And that will, by the way, be the fastest device to get to that level, this saturation concept. The current ranking king is the DVD player. The DVD player is going to get knocked off its perch by the smartphone. There's been a lot of chatter when the iPad came out, is it a post-PC device? What is a post-PC device? Does that really matter? Well, it's already been more than a year since the tablet market was bigger than the PC market, even with declining tablet sales. That's pretty crazy. Beginning of the year, estimates came out that figured that half of all PCs sold here this year were going to be tablets, so we'll actually know whether that's the case here in a few months. Plenty of people own these things. Half of all Americans, at least, own either an e-reader or a tablet. I'd be curious to know how many own both, and how many maybe don't realize they can use a tablet for both. My wife actually didn't know there was an iBooks app for a while. She's like, wait, I can read that on my iPad? I'm like, yes. She's like, oh, you have to show me that. Huge chunk of shopping traffic now comes from mobile. This doesn't surprise me, because it's so darn convenient. If somebody tells you about something, you can just pull out your phone, tap, 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 and it's on its way to your front door. That's very powerful. Luke Wroblewski told this story at a conference. He was grilling one day and ran out of grill seasoning. So he just took his phone out of his pocket, launched the Amazon app, aimed it at the grill seasoning, took the picture of the grill seasoning. Amazon recognized what it was, and tap, tap, buy, put his phone back in his pocket, and the next day the drone drops the grill seasoning off on his front porch. That's kind of magical. That's a very powerful interaction for people. Most popular camera on Flickr is, of course, not a camera, it's a phone. In fact, right now, the top 5 are all phones. That's remarkable to me. Now, I get it, because the best camera you have is, of course, the camera you have with you, and the camera you have with you everywhere you go these days is your phone. You could make a very compelling argument that Apple and Samsung are the leading camera manufacturers on Earth right now. They're pouring an awful lot of attention and energy into those cameras. You look at every time one of these new devices rolls out, they spend a pretty good chunk of the keynotes talking about the improvements to the camera, improvements to the software, improvements to the lens, improvements to what it allows you to do. That's very cool. I've taken several pictures with my camera that I've managed to blow up and hang around my house, or I'm sorry, with my phone. And it opens up so much more. I mean, think of some of the things you can do with this that you couldn't do with a regular point and shoot. My wife was going to stop at the grocery store one day, but she forgot her list at home. And so she texted me and said, could you please take a picture of the shopping list and send it to me? That's very, very compelling kinds of things. It just allows you to do so many more things. Average person looks at their phone 150 times a day, which means we're talking about 15 times or about 10 times an hour. I think that's actually low for some folks. Certainly if you've got a teenager, that number is probably a lot closer to 150 times an hour. It probably never goes away. I don't know how to feel about some of the wearable tech, because it especially the watch, because it seems to have so largely been replaced by people's phones. I'll be very curious to see how that plays out. Will people go back to strapping something to their wrist or not? We'll see. Of course, this isn't just a US thing or even just a EU thing. China mobile has seen huge spikes in their mobile data traffic. I don't think that should be surprising to anybody. I love this quote. So Ben said earlier this year that, this year alone in China, there'll be more smartphones sold than there are people that live in the US. So that's another thing to ponder. A lot of companies today are so amped up about getting into that Chinese market. Okay, well, what's your mobile experience look like? How do you think those people are going to get online? Probably with their smartphone. Here in the UK, almost a quarter of online sales are coming from mobile devices. That's pretty crazy, I think. And this number keeps growing, by the way. It just keeps getting bigger. And so I would expect this Christmas shopping season that number will go up. BBC, they publish all sorts of fun numbers. And one of the things they said recently was they're getting far more traffic from tablets than they are from PCs. That doesn't surprise me, because that's a nice layback kind of device, so that makes a lot of sense. In a lot of developing countries, this is your wallet. So in Kenya, most people use their phone to pay for things. In fact, there was, I can't remember which magazine it was, but they actually sent a reporter, I think it might have been to Kenya, for like a week. And can you survive for a week in this country using nothing but your phone to pay for things? And he was able to do it. And he said it was actually fairly convenient. And this doesn't involve any like, near field technology or beacons or anything like that. I mean, this is just like a feature phone kind of a process. Yeah, it's very cool. Mobile's about 20% of global internet traffic right now. I think most of the rest of it's probably Netflix or people streaming BitTorrent, probably one of those two. Again, this is the kind of stuff that we need to be talking to our business partners about. They need to understand that this is not a small, niche-y kind of thing. They need to understand, even if we're not a technology company, this matters to us. We have people coming to our experiences right now on their mobile devices. How's that working out for them? Are they happy, or are they cursing at us? We call the personal computer, but it's really not, is it? It's not even close to as personal as your phone. How many of you would willingly leave your cell phone up on this table during a break? I mean, how many of you get a little shaky when you're like, where's my phone? Do you guys get the phantom vibrations? Like you feel like your phone's vibrating and you reach like, oh, it's not, what's going on? This has happened to me. I've been at my desk. I've had my phone sitting on the desk next to me. It's in my line of sight. I know it's on the desk. I still feel like there's something vibrating in my pocket. It's like, do I have like a tumor growing here or something? Is that why I'm feeling vibrating? I don't know. I have started calling the PC legacy. This does not make me very popular sometimes at work, because we've got a lot of legacy apps. And so when I say, that desktop thing is legacy, they don't take very kindly to that. I don't know if Porus is right in terms of timing. He said this a couple years back. I don't know if it's 5 years, I don't know if it's 7, but it will certainly be soon. This is not going to be a 20-year out problem. We're probably going to hit this point in the shockingly near future where, oh my, the mobile thing, this cell phone is already starting to become legacy, because there'll be some new thing we need to target. I don't know if that's going to be your watch, I don't know if that's going to be your glasses, but there'll be something else. Third quarter PC sales were horrible last year. 2014 is seeing another slide. 2013 was the worst decline that's been reported in history. For most of PC's existence, it just kind of kept on this steady march northward. HP has now decided they're going to split up. I'm not sure which one gets the H and which one gets the P, but that was supposed to be the big deal. And of course, their last CEO basically got fired because he had the audacity to say, we're probably not going to do this PC thing anymore. Jason tweeted this actually quite a long time back, and I think he's very, very accurate. I think for our kids in particular, they're not going to know what we mean by a link to the desktop version. It's going to be a very foreign concept to them. They're just going to expect, well, of course I can do it on my phone. Of course I can do it on my iPad. How else would I do it? What else is a computer? I think sometimes we get caught up in what we need from a computer, that we forget that for a huge chunk of the population, an iPad, a tablet, is more than sufficient to do 80, 90, even 100% of what they want to do with a computer. And it's so much easier for them to use. So just because we complain because I can't get to the command line, that's irrelevant to almost every computer user on Earth. We are the very small minority that cares about some of that stuff. Now, I don't know if we're there quite yet, but I do know we're in a world right now where if you've got something that's external, it's mobile. I guarantee it. I guarantee somebody is coming to your experience right now on a mobile device. The mantra that we've used is what our customers want, when they want it, on whatever device they want to use. And we expect that's going to be a mobile device. Now the challenge here is organizational. The challenge here, quite frankly, is getting people on board with some of the change that's necessary to support this. In many companies, mobile has a pretty unique perception to it. In a lot of organizations, it's the new hotness. So everybody wants to be part of mobile. Everybody wants to have mobile on their resume. So this ends up being both a blessing and a curse. And so what I've seen in my company, anytime you spin up anything that has the M word in it, you're going to get all sorts of attention. Everybody wants to own it. Everybody wants to be part of it. Everybody wants to be able to go to their boss and say, yep, I was involved in that mobile thing. But I've seen very few people that actually want to dig in and work through the engineering problems that are inherent in the mobile space. This is a lot harder. It's very fun to be able to talk in a meeting about, whimsically about the mobile project, but then actually have to go in and figure out some kind of a deep, dark technical issue. Oh, we don't want anything to do with that. So the way I like to think about this, everybody wants to own the cool parts, everybody wants the credit. Nobody actually wants to solve the problems. And I guarantee you there are real engineering issues you're going to have to overcome in your organization to make mobile work. A lot of companies believe that a vendor is going to come along with a magic sparkle pony, and for a large sum of money, the mobile problem will just go away. And you know what? I wish that was true. I wish someone could actually sell you a magic shrink ray. I'd love to buy it, to be honest with you, because it would make my life significantly easier. There are no shrink rays. And too many organizations, they look at this and they think, well, my main issue is I need to take this grid and I need to display it on a tablet. That's not enough. You know, I mean, that might kind of get you through kind of the initial, so what can we do with mobile? But the more important thing is, what should that experience be like for someone on a tablet? What are the capabilities they need? What are the things they're going to try to do? Now, I'd love it if there were silver bullets here, guys. There aren't. I am adamantly of the opinion that we should be building mobile first now. This is controversial in a lot of organizations because we sit there and go, well, we've never done this before. We really need to focus on the desktop version, to which I sort of challenge that and say, I don't think so. I think we need to be thinking about what this looks like on a phone or a tablet, and then we can retrofit that stuff into the legacy, desktop version. That's a huge shift. Another big challenge here is we need to accept the fact that user interfaces today are essentially ephemeral. They are going to change, and they're going to change often. So there's a lot of interesting things we need to dig through as an organization when we start approaching this world. Some key questions that you need to get your head wrapped around are, what operating systems do we want to support? You can't support everything. So we need to be real honest about our capabilities here. We need to actually look at the people that are coming at us, try to figure out, okay, do we need to support BlackBerry? Do we need to support Windows Mobile? In my organization, we've decided it's iOS and Android, and that's it. Until we get any kind of compelling numbers out of either Windows Mobile or BlackBerry, we're not even going there. And I would be very hard pressed to say we will ever support BlackBerry again. So I'd be shocked. So we're very actively pushing off of that. Now, unfortunately, it isn't enough to just say, we're going to do iOS and Android. We actually have to get into version numbers too, because there's different capabilities from one version to another. Now, in general, iOS upgrades happen very rapidly. That was the case with iOS 6 and iOS 7. We're seeing a little less of that now with iOS 8. And the expectation or the idea here is that a lot of people, they don't practice good phone hygiene, might be the way to think of it. They have 20 gigs of photos on their 32 gig phone, and they don't realize that they can actually remove photos from their phone. They don't realize they can plug it into a computer and offload those photos. And I'm not saying they should have to, by the way. And so when a new version of the operating system comes out, it's like, well, there's not enough space for me to actually push this onto your phone. So that's kind of the expectation right now of why we haven't seen the uptick in iOS 8. Sadly, the latest version of Android is not on very many devices. Sadly. This just kills me. Usually the expectation here is when Google announces a new version of Android at I/O, a year from now is about when you can expect to actually get to access those APIs on any kind of widespread basis. Now, just because you can sideload or you can, deal with ROMs and all that kind of stuff does not mean the average person can. The average person does not get an update on Android until they buy a new phone. That's just how that works. Gingerbread and ice cream sandwich are still almost, for a long time, they were over 50%, and they finally started to drop down, and that's pretty sad to me. Typically what you see here is by the time upgrades are available, it's time for people to get a new phone under contract. And so that ends up playing into this sort of market where I don't get a new version of that until I go get a new phone. Now, I didn't realize how widespread that was until about, I guess, a year ago or so. I was at my chiropractor's office, and I was talking to one of their physical assistants, and she was saying, hey, you kind of know things about these phones, because every time I was in there, I was on my phone, and we talked, and she knew I was a geek. She said, could you help me, pick a phone here? I'm like, well, sure. And so she was looking at all these phones that were running Android 2.1 and 2.2. And I'm just like, you realize this is an incredibly old version of Android, right? You're not going to be able to run a lot of stuff on there. It's not going to run all the new things. And she's just sort of like, oh, that's okay. I just want to use it to call my daughter and text my daughter, and that's it. I'm like, wow, really? Because you're buying a computer here. You could do a lot more with that. She wasn't fazed by that. That didn't bother her. When Jelly Bean came out, it took 2 months to hit 1.5%. 2 freaking months. iOS 6 hit 15% in the first day. 48 hours after iOS 6 came out, adoption rate was hovering between 25 and 35%. A week, 60% of iPhones were updated and 40% of iPads were updated. 17% adoption for iOS 6 was slightly more than 24 hours. Ice cream sandwich took almost a year. That to me is criminal. This to me is the biggest failing of Android. Google should have, and admittedly, they are trying to wrest some of that control back. So as they move more things into Google Play, that makes it a lot easier because they can push stuff there and there's no carrier to get in the way. But still, we have this long legacy we have to deal with here. iOS 7, 24 hours after release, was on 18% of devices. In 3 days, in one long weekend, it had surpassed the number of iOS 6 devices out there. At one point during iOS 7's upgrade cycle, there were 2.2 terabytes of downloads happening every second. Every second. That's crazy. It's almost like Game of Thrones. It's pretty close to that. The first weekend alone, 200 million devices are updated. So we have the expectation, when a new version of iOS comes up, we have to support it. There's none of this wait 6 months kind of thing. And this is actually a dilemma that our internal IT organization has. Because we have several thousand BYOD devices right now. So people bring their own personal iPhones to work and connect to our corporate email calendar and whatnot. Well, those folks get an email when a new version of iOS comes out saying, oh, hold on, don't upgrade yet. Believe me, they upgrade. A lot of folks have the auto update turned on. And of course, anybody that goes and buys a brand new phone when they come out, they get the new version, period. They don't have a choice. They can't say, well, I'd like my new iPhone 6 to have iOS 7, please. Not an option. As an organization, as a community, we need to get comfortable with the fact that these updates happen at least annually, if not more often. That era of Windows XP where it's like, oh good, 10 years, we're never gonna have to touch that again, is over. We're seeing major upgrades to operating systems happen every few months. We need to be able to handle that. Now, iOS 8 is not seeing this kind of uptake right now. It's about 50-50, it's like 47-47 for iOS 7 and iOS 8, with other basically filling in the remaining percentage points there. Again, the best guess as to why we're seeing that is there's a bunch of folks who, well, there is a percentage of people who realized there were some bugs with iOS 8 and so they decided not to upgrade. But for most people, I think what it boils down to is they have auto update turned on, but their phone is essentially full, and so there's not enough room for the update to get pushed. It'll be interesting to see what, if anything, Apple does about that. I actually do have a friend who is still rocking iOS 6 because he, quote unquote, does not like the look of iOS 7. And so he's like basically not gonna go there until he has no choice. Well, that's one way to do it, I guess. So. This is a very common theme though. The new version of iOS pretty much is gonna have a pretty large share of the market. And when it comes to Android, it's almost always gonna be one rep behind. Very rare that you can expect, oh good, I can target something that's in a lollipop. Yeah, just hold your horses on that. Fragmentation is an issue. Now, this is a historical slide, but it really hasn't changed. This same basic pattern has remained. Now, again, some of this is mitigated by the fact that more and more things are ending up in Google Play as opposed to in raw Android itself, so that does help. But just keep that in the back of your head when you have to support Android stuff. It is non-trivial to support multiple operating systems. If we're going to write native apps, even if you're going to use some kind of a wrapper, you will write some native code. It may not be tens of thousands of lines. You will, no matter how you choose to do it. You're going to have to write some Objective-C or Swift. You're going to have to write some Java, Dalvik type stuff. So you're always going to have that. You also need to think long and hard about which devices you want to support. This is still one of my favorite photos. This is one company's attempt to put out, here's the devices that we test against. Now, this wasn't all their devices. They actually put in their blog post, these were only the ones we could fit on the conference room table. So if you've got to spend an hour regression testing on every one of those devices, that's like a person week, just to regression test, at least. And that's one of the biggest changes you have to get your head wrapped around in this space, is you will spend far more time testing. Expect to spend more testing budget than you have in the past. So this is a non-trivial problem, guys. One developer looked at his log and said, my gosh, I have almost 4,000 distinct devices that have downloaded my app. 4,000. Now, your gut reaction when you see a heat map like this is, well, all I really need to worry about are kind of this big chunk up here. Well, that's true up until a point. You know, because we got this big block of people over here. What happens if one of those is your really important customer and they have a bug on their esoteric Android device and they want it fixed, and they want it fixed right now? How do you get your hands on that device? How do you test it? How do you make sure we don't get that problem in the future? How long do you need to test on that device? And I should also point out that that's a pretty big block of people. It's actually slightly bigger than that block of people. OpenSignal has done some really interesting visualizations on this. There's been more or less the same for the last couple of years. But again, I know a lot of us just want to focus our attention in that upper left-hand corner, and that's very natural. This is probably where your money is, by the way. There's a decent chance that this quadrant down here are largely unwilling to pay you any money. And this is probably a lot of very cheap low-end devices that may not even have some of the capabilities that you would care about. But I do want to point out that these two boxes are roughly the same size. Can you afford to piss off a quarter of your market? Probably not. I mean, in Android land, we're talking about 1 billion of these things, plus or minus. I mean, that's 250,000 people. That's a big market. That's a lot of potential customers. Now, it's possible they're not our customers, in which case, okay, maybe that's not an issue for us. But we need to know that. We need to get our heads wrapped around that. Last time they did a count, we're talking almost 12,000 distinct devices. That's crazy. I like to refer to this as the matrix of pain. So we've got all these different devices, but we also have different sizes. This is OpenSignal's visualization of the Android screen sizes. Where would we even begin here? I mean, there's a couple of thicker lines. Maybe we could target that. But this is not fun, to say the least. And good luck trying to find the right breakpoints. Now, up until 3 weeks ago, this was the iOS screen size. Now we've got 2 more blips on there. And I guess maybe one more. I don't know, maybe in about an hour now, they might announce a slightly larger iPad. I don't know. So this is why you still see a lot of folks do iOS first, even though the Android market share is larger. So these are the kind of things that we need to deal with. And of course, nowadays, we've got a lot of folks talking about the Surface. Not, of course, the original Surface. We've gone ahead and reused that name, because why not? Apparently it was really good. So of course, we mean the new one, which was very quickly replaced by the 2, which was very quickly replaced by the 3, which, I don't know, may very quickly be replaced by the 4, or maybe not. I'm not 100% sold that they're going to keep pouring money down that hole. You know, they may very well decide, you know what, we're not ready for that. We have an open question in our company right now, because we've got a lot of folks that are piloting the Windows Surface 3s. Is that going to run Windows 10? You know, the best sort of feedback we've gotten is the device itself is awesome. It's a good size, it's very light, it's very durable. You know, it's got a great screen, great keyboard, or good keyboard at least. But almost everyone has complained about Windows 8. So I don't know, is it going to run Windows 10? Maybe. Will Windows 10 be better than Windows 8? Maybe. I mean, did you guys see that it was an April Fool's joke last year saying Windows 9 is too perfect, it's too good, that's why we're going to skip to Windows 10? Which of course was resurrected when Microsoft announced we're not going to Windows 9, we're going straight to Windows 10. Which allegedly was because a bunch of scripts out there look for Win 9. So, I guess we'll see. I don't see a whole lot of those in the wild, though. The Microsoft sales guys are pushing them. That's obvious. I mean, I know in our company, there's a lot of folks who think this is going to be the answer to all our problems, but it sure doesn't seem like they're everywhere you go. It's not like you go in a coffee shop and everybody's got their Surface out. I really do think that keyboard cover thing is very magical. I think they did a great job with that. And from what I've heard from our folks that have used it, it's quite nice. But it does seem like an odd kind of laptop-like thing. Because you try to put that in your lap, it falls over. It doesn't really want to be done that way. It wants to be on a table. We'll see. So we got to deal with all these different device sizes, everything from 3.5 inch. And I do kind of wonder if we're going to see small phones appear at some point. You know, because I mean, I like the iPhone 6. It's a little big for me, and I find that I have to really move it around in my hand to get to that upper right-hand corner for me. I hold it in my left hand. I can't imagine what people with smaller hands would do with this phone. My expectation is a lot of people, especially with the really big devices, you know, the 5.5s, the 6s, it's all two-handed. They just have given up on the idea of ever using it with one hand. I don't know how to feel about that. That seems limiting to me, but clearly a lot of people like their bigger phones. That's fine. In fact, I think the new Nexus is a 6-inch device, if I remember right. That's huge. I think that's even bigger. It is bigger than the Note, isn't it? Because I think the Note's 5.5, or is the new one even bigger than that? I don't know. So I know it's bigger than the Note 3. I guess I'm not sure what size the Note 4 is. But we have a diversity of devices here, guys, and Luke put together this little timeline, so to speak, of that. You know, we've kind of gradually seen things get bigger and bigger, and you know, we have kind of that mini tablet, phablet space. Whether or not people really like those devices is still kind of up to debate, as far as I'm concerned. And then, of course, we have these hybrid-y things where, you know, I can pull the screen off and it's a tablet, I plug it in, it's a laptop, I can turn the screen around and draw on it. I actually saw a guy using one of these on a plane recently, and it was very imaginative because this is how he got around the fact that you're not supposed to use your laptop during takeoff and taxi kind of stuff. That's only supposed to be tablets and phones. But he just turned it so that it looked like a tablet, and so the flight attendant, of course, didn't notice, which I wouldn't expect her to. I mean, that's a pretty technically esoteric thing, but I was quite aware of the fact that he's actually using a laptop right now. He's not supposed to because it's too heavy. I mean, that thing could go flying, apparently, allegedly. This is bad enough, but it's very clear we're going to have to support something next in the near future. And by near future, I'm thinking this is like a 6-month, 18-month, 24-month kind of problem, not 10 years in the future. I don't know if, you know, Android, Apple's watch or the Google Wear stuff is going to take off. I've got a friend that's got the new Moto 360/270. He loves it. You know, he thinks it's awesome. I'm very bullish. I mean, I think the Apple Watch is going to be very cool, but I'm very much of the opinion at some point in the near future, we're going to have to target something else. There's going to be something other than a rectangle of glass. We're going to have our experience on that. What's that going to look like? Now, sadly, viewports don't always match up for us. In fact, one of the things we discovered with the iPhone 6 Plus, it ends up basically showing up to us like a tablet. And so when we use the sort of tablet-sized CSS breakpoints, it doesn't respond well, obviously. It doesn't look good. So we actually have put together, one of our groups put together a cheat sheet, you know, basically saying, here's the things you need to look out for with the iPhone 6, the 6 Plus, you know, iOS 7, iOS 8, things like that. The hard part, guys, is you cannot test everything. This is where we have to apply some engineering. We have to apply some, you know, 80-20 kind of principles. Go look at your logs. Your logs will tell you what you have to test. You know, we have about 10 to 12, sometimes as much as 15 devices that we think we're getting enough traffic from that we have to put it in our stock kit. You know, but the challenge here is making sure that we're not testing everything, because we can't, but that we're testing enough so that we get, again, kind of that 80-20 rule. You know, if something esoteric pops up, we can certainly add it, but we're trying to make sure that we hit the right balance point. I mentioned this before, expect to spend more on testing. We shoot for about 50% right now. It's going to eat up about half of your budget, maybe even a little higher. We need to think about carriers. Some carriers block some features, so we need to make sure we're not trying to roll something out and discover that one of the major carriers in wherever market we're targeting doesn't actually allow that functionality to happen. We need to think about what app markets we want to be on. If you think that Google and Apple have really stringent policies when you deploy through them, go read Amazon's terms and conditions. That'll make you think twice about ever putting anything in that app store. Now, this is a really fascinating blog entry. Basically, these guys, unbeknownst to them, even though the terms and conditions basically say Amazon can offer the app for free, but that they would still pay you. And they're like, hey, guess what? We're going to feature your app, which means we're going to give it away. Okay, cool, so we're going to make some money on that. Nope, we're not going to pay you anything. It's like, really? That kind of sucks. So basically what these guys ended up getting was, yeah, they got a whole bunch of downloads, which basically meant their support costs went up, but they made no money on that. They just had more support costs. That didn't work out so well. It's a brave new world, guys. There's just no getting around that. We need to make sure we're aware of that. And then we approach it properly within our organization so people understand there are limits to what we can do. We can't test on everything. So we're going to have to go in with the mindset that some things are going to slip through. So now we got to introduce these ideas. And this is where things get tricky, because now we're dealing with people. People are hard. People don't like to change. Organizations being made up of people also don't like to change. So I wish I could give you a set of steps that will automatically make everybody open up the front door and say, thank you for coming and rescuing us. This is not how it works. What we have to do is basically quantify the risk. We need to help folks understand the size of the market. That's why I give you guys all those stats. We need to help folks understand what this means to us if we don't have a mobile experience. I mean, think about your organization right now. If somebody went to the App Store and typed in your company's name, what would they find? Would they find something? Or would they find, maybe they find an app, but it's got a whole bunch of one-star reviews. Bless you, how does that look for your organization? How does it look if they can't find anything at all? It's not a good place to be. The hard part is you need to be prepared to tell this story again and again and again and again. I cannot tell you how many times I have repeated the same set of information to seemingly the same group of people, and they still don't quite get it. So the way we like to think about this is you need to have a 1, a 5, and a 30 ready. So the 1 minute is, what would happen if you got stuck in the elevator with the VP? What would you want to tell her? And that's, a minute is not a very long period of time. And so what are the things you would want to get across in a real succinct manner? And you need to practice that. We actually do this every so often in our team meeting. We'll go around and give me your 1. And a lot of our folks drone on and on and on for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes until our boss finally says, okay, stop. You just talked for 4.5 minutes. Did you know that? And they're like, but I have so much to say. Well, that's great. You don't have 5 minutes. You have 45 seconds from this floor to that floor. Get it done. The 5 is what would happen if somebody said, hey, I'd like you to come to my team meeting and give a little overview of what you're working on. Give my team kind of the 10,000-foot view of what's going on in that area. And by the way, that team meeting could be a team full of developers, could be a team full of managers, could be a team full of senior managers. And the message you're going to deliver to those 3 groups is going to be different. And every so often I get dragged into a room full of a whole bunch of people that are 4 or 5 rungs above me in the organization. Those are tense meetings for me because they can squash me just on principle. And so I have to make sure that I'm effectively communicating in the way they want to hear things. They're not impressed by me spewing acronyms at them. So I need to make sure that I frame what I'm trying to talk about in their language. And the 30 would be, what happens if somebody said, hey, I want you to give a lunch and learn, or I want you to give an overview for the organization, in a couple of weeks. Again, you need to have some stuff prepared for that, and you need to practice it. It's the only way you get good at it is by practicing it. It's always good to have some kind of a document you can send to people. Even if they don't read it, a lot of times they're just reassured by, oh, okay, good, you've written some stuff down. You must actually have things under control. If you've got nothing, it's like, well, I need to get my nose up in your business because I don't trust you. I call this a conceptual argument, a conceptual architecture document. This is a very short kind of thing. It's 2-3 pages. It's got a couple of real simple diagrams on it. Highlights the capabilities, the gaps, things of that nature. It's not deep techie kind of stuff. It's a little higher level. That has saved me an awful lot of noise. Very simple. It does not need to be super formal. But just, again, to show that, nope, I know what I'm doing. I got it covered. See here, we have thought this through. I can't emphasize enough to you how important this part is, guys. Just because you understand it does not mean all your leaders get it yet. They may not have seen the light at the end of that tunnel. It's on us to do the convincing here. Now, in a lot of organizations, you start talking about mobile and they say, well, we don't actually have any mobile applications. In fact, for several months, I heard this about my division. And I'm like, well, that's funny because we actually have 2 or 3 of them. So anytime somebody tells you we don't have any mobile apps, you might want to double check on that. And if you don't, my question would be, why the heck not? Because there's a pretty good chance you could have one, should have one. So this is where it's on us to kind of figure out, well, where would this fit in our organization? Where would it make sense? Where could it help people? We actually have an application right now. All it allows people to do is hit approve or not. So we've got one of our parts of our business. Folks can do up to a certain level before they need essentially VP approval. Well, those VPs are traveling all the time. And so we have lost business in the past when we couldn't get an approval quick enough because the VP was traveling around the country. And so the current system, the only way they can actually get at that is if they get out their laptop, they're in an office that has a corporate connection, or they VPN in. That's not very convenient when they're driving around or they're visiting agents or whatever it is they're doing. So we built them a mobile app. Here's the list of things you need to approve. And you can just go tap, 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 tap. And it's very simple. There's not, I mean, this is not a bazillion different capabilities. It's one very basic capability, but it's proven to be incredibly successful because it helps them with a real need and it fits into their workflow. If you sit around and wait for the customer to come to you, they probably won't. This is actually something one of my colleagues here in the UK, he and I've had a lot of conversations around this because a lot of our customers aren't actually aware of what we can do here. And I think a lot of them are under the impression this is like a 5-year project to get mobile running. And for many of us, it isn't, because we probably already have web services stood up. And so it's basically just a matter of new consumer of those web services. As much as I hate to say it, you might have to lead the horse to water. You might have to actually bring them kicking and screaming, here, this is what a mobile device looks like, here, this is what it can do. They probably don't use their phone the way you use yours. Just because you know all the cool whiz-bangy stuff does not mean they do. Be prepared to show them that. If there's an app that you have that is like just revolutionary for you because it just does something amazing, show them that. And it could be something simple. I know a bunch of my friends in Norway were showing me this thing where they have an app that will basically push a notification to you when the metro line is coming. And so in large chunks of Norway, it's very cold for parts of the year. You don't really want to be standing out waiting for the train to come by. So basically pushing, hey, train's going to be here in 2 minutes. So then you can run out and meet the train as opposed to having to wait there and freezing your hiney off. Right, so we need to help them understand the business value here. Because there is a real business value. Now, we might have to do some kind of spreadsheety kind of things to help them understand why that's important, to help them get an idea of what the cost of that is, and importantly, what the cost of not having that presence is. And if we've already got web services, we're already kind of halfway there. Because now all we have to do is skin it. We need to, now that's not trivial. I don't want to say that, okay, good, problem solved, let's go to lunch. But it certainly is easier than we don't have any web services at all. Because now we've got to re-architect. It's very tempting to fall into what I call the implementation detail trap. And this kind of gets back to what Neil was talking about in the keynote about meta work. It's a lot more fun to argue about meta stuff than it is to actually get into the depths of what we're doing. Where this crops up in my world is, well, we should really be using this library, not that library. This group's using Angular, this group's using Backbone. One of them is wrong. I disagree with that. I'm very much of the opinion that we don't know what the right answer is in this space. If you guys looked at it and said Backbone makes sense, and you guys looked at it and said Angular makes sense for you, who am I to argue that? We're acting from the technical level, we're actually pushing diversity because we don't know what the best way to do this is. We want to actually get some real world experience so that we can come back and say, aha, we built 3 apps. This one was the easiest, this one was the easiest to maintain, took us the least amount of time, whatever. Now we can actually make a real statement about why we'd want to choose one library or the other, as opposed to just reflexively picking one because somebody had an argument with a VP. I don't really think it matters. And even if we choose one today and decide, as an organization, we're standardizing on Angular, give it a year or 2. It'll probably be something different. You can already see the infighting around Angular 2.0. What's that going to mean for Angular? What happens if Google decides we're not putting any more effort into Angular anymore? What's that going to do to the community? What's that going to do to folks who use Angular? I'm not trying to say Angular is going away or Angular is a bad choice, but to think that Angular is going to be the only thing we're using in 3 years, well, that's pretty speculative. I mean, I remember in the Ajax space, prototype.js was the library used until jQuery. Now, I don't know that jQuery is going anywhere, but it could. Nothing would stop anybody from building something better. We are actively pushing variety here, actively pushing variety. And this does put us in disagreement with some of our VPs because they would prefer there was one and only one answer. And we would prefer variety because we're not sure who's going to win. So we'd rather have multiple baskets instead of everything in one. You're going to encounter some interesting issues in this space, I guarantee it. A big one is mobile device management. In a lot of organizations today, they've very quickly figured out that, geez, people actually have better phones than the ones we would give them, and they'd rather use their own phone anyway. And wait, if they're using their own phone, we don't have to buy it for them, they buy it themselves. That's cheaper for us. And of course, a lot of companies take this as an opportunity to say, and we don't even have to pay the bill, or even a portion of the bill. This to me is one of my complaints. I think that if an organization is going to open up BYOD, I really think part of that should be at least a subsidy towards your monthly bill. That's just me. But if you are going to have BYOD, you have to account for the fact that you've now got corporate data on a phone that you don't control. What happens when somebody inevitably loses it, leaves it in a cab, drops it, it gets stolen, and you've got your corporate data on there? Now, there's a lot of vendor solutions in this space, and I can pretty much guarantee your security people are going to have a lot of opinions about this. You're going to have to use something. For a long time, we just essentially had the direct connection to our Exchange servers, and then eventually security's like, no, not anymore. And we had to bring in a vendor solution, so there's an app that gets installed on your phone, and there's a few other things profile-wise that go on, and then there's some restrictions so that if your phone does get misplaced, they can wipe the corporate data off without having to wipe your whole phone. Because it's really, really crummy when they wipe your entire phone and you lose that really great picture of your kid or that sunset or whatever it happens to be that's now gone, irretrievable. Sorry. Mobile app management, this is actually something we are dealing with right now. We've been arguing about this for the last 2 or 3 months. How do we evaluate apps? How do we decide this app is a good app, this app isn't? This is an app people want. I'm on the domain team right now that does the review on this stuff, and I've had a lot of back and forth over the right way to do this. I'm very much of the opinion that if one of our employees says this app is helpful and it isn't clearly a front for like the Russian mafia or something, we should let them have it. And a lot of our folks push back on that. In fact, we had one guy who wanted, I can't remember the name of the app, but basically what it would do is tell you, what restaurants are nearby, what gas stations are nearby hotels, things like that, and it was all in one app. And we had this seemingly endless conversation about, well, why can't they just use Apple Maps or Google Maps for that? And my reaction to that is, if this saves them 5 minutes a day, who cares? It's not like we're paying $100 million for the application. The application's free. So if they want to use it, they think it's helpful, let's just let them have it. Now we also have a bunch of people who are very concerned that, well, what if there's a keylogger in that application? To which I reply, what's the likelihood of that? I mean, it could happen, that's true, but that would be pretty hard to get past the app stores these days. They're doing a very good job of reviewing that kind of stuff. And of course, the other part of it is, can you even review it for that? Do you have the technical wherewithal to go in and see, is there a keylogger in here? Probably not. By the way, there are vendors that will do that for you. There are vendors that will review the apps and tell you these apps are safe or not. I don't know that I would put a whole lot of stock in that, simply because it sounds like, years and years ago, a friend of mine told me this story where he was working at a client and they really, the consulting company wanted to use this open source library, and the company's like, well, okay, but we really have to have a commercial license. And so they ended up finding some company that would give you a commercial license for this widely used open source thing. And the kind of the running joke was, it's probably a company that's registered in like the guy's dog's name, so that if anybody actually does sue, it's like, well, hey, it's the dog's company. Nothing you can do about it. The dog doesn't have any assets. But I would be very hesitant to believe anybody's actually doing the kind of work that would really be required to say, yes, this is that much better. You may need an internal app store. You may need someplace your employees can come to get the apps that you've vetted, perhaps, or the ones that you've decided are better than others, so that they can come in and download it from there as opposed to having to find it in a big bad app store. We think it's very trivial for somebody to go in and do a search, but there's a lot of things that come up that are very similar, and they may not know the difference. So when you're talking about 1 million+ apps in the app stores, this can help greatly, because it's like, no, here's the 25 or the 30 that we have decided are really useful. Testing, man, I wish there was a magic answer here. There isn't, at least not yet. It's very hard to automate this. Steps are being taken, but it's tough. We're exploring a couple different things right now. One broke when iOS 7 came out, unfortunately, and they've not been able to upgrade since then, even though iOS 8 is now out. That's very frustrating to us. We're actually bringing in a new vendor to try another approach to this. You are almost assuredly going to have to use a cloud lab for some of this stuff, because there's just too many things to try to do all on your own. There's a lot of other interesting things we need to consider testing. In the old world, I had like a T1 connection, or I had a Wi-Fi connection. I knew it was a wired connection. I knew what I was getting myself into. There might be some regional issues where that office has bad connectivity or something, but we're in a situation now where just depending on where you are in the city, you might have very different performance characteristics. You might have 5 bars over here, but 2 bars over here and none over there. You know, on my commute home, on a major interstate, in a major metropolitan area, there are 2 dead spots. I go to 0 bars for like 10 seconds, and then it comes back. So we need to make sure our apps are going to work when I transition from one cell network to another cell network. Will my app work when I go from one country to another country? What happens when I go and I start something, I go to airplane mode, and then I land in Germany, and I turn on my phone, I turn on airplane mode, does it still work? Does the app know what to do now? And we are adamantly of the opinion every mobile team needs a set of devices, they need a core kit. And for a long time, we had to fight this one. For a long time, we had people saying, well, aren't simulators enough? Can't you just use browsers? It gets you part of the way there. I guarantee you, you will run into a situation where it works just fine in the simulator or the browser and it breaks on the device. I guarantee you will see that. You need a core kit, and whatever that is for your company, based on whatever your logs tell you you need to have, that's what people should get when you say, hey, I'm starting up a new project, send me the kit. And a box should show up on their desk 2 days later, 3 days later, full of an iPhone 6 and a Samsung that and the other thing, an HTC this, and away you go. Now teams should be able to augment that, and you need to be hyper aware of what's going on. This is not a set and forget activity. You're going to need to reevaluate it on a regular basis. We do it at least twice a year, and basically every single time either Samsung or Apple introduces a new device, it almost automatically goes on the list. That's certainly true for the iPhone, and is usually true for whatever comes out of the Galaxy line, just sort of depends. But you need to look at your logs all the time. We actually built a lending library to do this. So we have a person that's her job, part of her job is to manage that for us. So when teams say they need an esoteric device, she can get that. When teams say, I'm starting up a project, I need a kit, she gets that for them. You can actually lease this stuff, and usually it's leased with a cell connection as well, so that you can do cellular testing if that's something that you need to do. A lot of times though, you're gonna wanna use the cloud for some of that stuff. Right, so there's various cloud vendors. Perfecto Mobile is one that we use, Utest is another. This is where we can start doing the really strange one-off-y kind of carrier network testing kind of things. So you're almost assuredly gonna need something in that space. They're kind of interesting. Basically the way, at least Perfecto Mobile works, they have like a rack, and you can purchase as many racks as you want, and it's a set of devices that are physically plugged in, and you can interact with them through a browser. So it isn't as good as someone actually sitting there tapping it, but it's a heck of a lot easier than having someone sit there and tap it. So it's about the best middle ground we've found so far. Take a look at your backend infrastructure. Is it ready for this kind of stuff? Do you have the right geography in terms of where your data centers are located? There are vendor packages that can help in this space. I like to call them sort of this enterprise mobile management. This is where we start getting into some interesting things around like geolocation. Are people from Germany allowed to access this application or not? I mean, the answer might be no. Is it acceptable for one of our employees to be using this while they're in another country? Regulatory rules might say the answer to that is no. So we need to make sure that we have geofencing capabilities. We need to make sure that the app that's accessing our services is actually authentically our app, that somebody didn't decompile it and try to put something insane in there, and now they're trying to attack our web services using what is ostensibly our application. We also need to think about what happens when we upgrade a service and we upgrade the app. How do we make sure that the new version of the app gets pushed out so that we don't have somebody trying to access our service with the old version of the app? Do we have a circuit breaker between and saying, sorry, you need to upgrade before you can do this? You probably want to have a push notification broker. One of the really interesting things that we get these days is I can push notifications to my users and my customers. That can be done directly, obviously, but generally we want to have something in between. So we either can build that ourselves if we want to own it. You can certainly buy that from vendors. There's a pretty good chance your backend system was not designed to be used in a mobile context. It was probably designed when you had 3 offices, and so it's located geographically to service those 3 offices, and now you've got people scattered all over the place. You might need to have little caches of data sprinkled throughout not just the country, but the world potentially. Now those can be spun up or down as necessary. I mean, let's say you're in a situation where We're going to have a whole bunch of people are going to be in this location because there was a catastrophe or there's a big event going on. You can spin up servers that are just going to be servicing that location for the period of time they're going to be there, and then you can shut them down when you're done. A lot of folks put adapters in front of existing services. In fact, there's a large retailer in the US that's done that. They've actually taken a bunch of existing SOAP web services, RESTful or SOAP XML services. They've put a Node app essentially in front of it to turn those endpoints into RESTful JSON endpoints. And so you're probably going to have to do some adapting there. And there's a very, very good chance you're going to need to move some of these things around. It's very different from when people were only going to be in a handful of offices to now they can quite literally be anywhere. Analytics is your friend here. This is a big deal, and it's hard to do, by the way. You want to understand what capabilities people are actually using. One of the big fights you're going to get into almost immediately is, what does the mobile system need to do? And by the way, if you ask your customer that, the answer will undoubtedly be everything. So the challenge to you then is to go, okay, well, what are the top 3, the top 5? And then you need to make sure that's actually what people are using. So we can augment from there. Sometimes, I hate to do this, sometimes you put something out there because you have to. Keep track of it. Are people actually accessing it? And if they're not, then you can go back to your customer and say, you know what, this feature's been live now for 2 months. It's been accessed 5 times. Can we take it out now? They'll probably say no, but at least you've got data. You also need to log crashes. All right, I wish somebody would give you a really robust, this is what I was doing when, they won't. So this can be vital to figuring out what the heck went wrong on that particular device. So make sure you have a logging system set up. And again, there are vendor solutions for that. You can also roll your own. There are essentially 3 models, and some people argue there's a 4th, but I think 3 is a simpler way to think about it. You've got pure web. So it's just web, they're just going to access it from a browser. Pure native. You're going to write Swift or Objective-C, or you're going to write, Dalvik, Java stuff. And then there's the in-between. There's wrapper or shell apps. Now some people argue there's sort of 2 variants on that. There's one that's mostly web with just a little bit of native versus mostly native with a little bit of web. I don't know that that's terribly useful to have that fine a distinction, but some people will put it that way. So you basically wrap a native bit around your web view. And that then allows you to push it to various platforms. Now some people think this is the greatest thing ever because you write one web version of your app, you've got one code base, and now it's everywhere. So they look at it as the best of both worlds. I think it's a lot closer to the worst of both worlds in many instances. You at least need to have your eyes open when you go down the path of using a hybrid or wrapper. There are some serious pros here. You basically have one code base. I should say basically because I guarantee you will still write something native. You'll never find yourself in a situation where there is 0 Objective-C, 0 Java. You're always going to have a little bit of something. It might be less, obviously, but there'll be something there. But at least in theory, it gives you the right once run anywhere. It does allow you to push changes more rapidly, at least after you get through the initial review. Now do bear in mind that at least with Apple, if you simply put a native wrapper on the web page, they will reject you. You need to do something unique that justifies it being wrapped. A lot of people, what they do there is they build in push notifications. And they use that as their uniqueness. It does let us use our familiar web stack, but I'd like to point out that the constraints here are serious. And so just because you've been building web apps for 10 years does not mean you're going to be a mobile web app developer instantaneously. It's not equivalent. The cons are pretty serious in my mind. The last big time we tried to do this, non-native looking thing really was with Swing. And I would very much posit that nobody other than a geek has ever used a Swing app. It's very rare. In fact, even IBM decided, well, we don't like Swing, we're going to build our own native, GUI toolkit. This concerns me though. If I now have a shim between me and a layer, I'm dependent on their upgrades. So let's say iOS 8 has this killer feature that's going to revolutionize our application. Well, I got to wait for my wrapper to support it before I can take advantage of it. Now, I've challenged some of these folks on this when I've been in some vendor meetings, and their response is always, oh, we're always right up to date. We're in all the developer programs. We're running betas from day one, and so as soon as it drops, we're ready. I don't know about that. I'm not going to hold my breath to say that 5 minutes after iOS 8's released, every one of the wrappers is instantly updated and I have full access to every API. I find that hard to believe. Performance is also a serious issue here. For a long time, Facebook had an HTML5-ish app and they abandoned it largely because of performance issues. So that's something to keep in mind. The UI web views are slower. They're not typically the pure client, the pure web browser that you get if you launch Chrome or Safari. The other side of this that concerns me is the Uncanny Valley. Now, this comes out of robotics, but it applies to user interfaces too. And basically what the Uncanny Valley says is, if you make a robot look like a robot, it's not creepy. If you make a robot look kind of like a human, it's not creepy. If you make a robot look exactly like a human, 100% like a human, it's a replicant, not creepy. Maybe it has really weird origami, but at least it's not creepy. If you make a robot 93% human, it's creepy as hell. So the best way I can actually describe it is by showing it to you. Here's a robot. Not creepy. Very industrial, obviously. I believe this one is actually designed to go find, little explosive devices and probably get blown up in the process. That's why it's, kind of cheap looking. Here's an artist rendition of a robot that looks kind of like a human. Not creepy. Weird looking. This makes me think of iRobot, actually, when I say this. Here's the Uncanny Valley. That's 94% or something. It's just wrong. I don't know what it is. I stared at this photo many times. I don't know what it is about this photo that's wrong, but it is. And you recognize it in your gut, and you recognize it immediately. The same thing happens to interfaces. You're never going to get somebody say, you know what, I'm going to give you a 1-star review because you violated the Uncanny Valley of interface design. They just delete your app and probably give you a 1-star review saying like fail or something else that's really critical. Hybrid is not perfect. It is not unicorns and rainbows, despite what a lot of people want you to believe. There's a really interesting blog that came out called The Shell Apps and Silver Bullets. And basically what they said is, we first went down this path, things were very easy, and then we just hit this wall. And the complexity overwhelmed us, and we were toast. And when I was reading this, I was thinking about a Rich Hickey presentation at Strangely a couple years ago called Simple Made Easy. And it was a really interesting talk about the difference between simple and easy, and why we need to choose the right one. So, which of these 3 approaches should you use? There are 3 answers in computer science that work for every question you've ever been asked. 42, another layer of indirection, and my all-time personal favorite, it depends. Now, I'm doing that somewhat to be glib and snarky, but it is the answer here. I don't know your situation. I don't know what makes the most sense for you. You've got to work through this on your own and think about it. There is an argument that applications have better usability. It's very clear that our users prefer applications. Very clear. We're talking like at an 85% clip here. If you poll people, 85% of people will tell you, no, I much prefer a mobile app to a mobile website. Ben tweeted this, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Everyone agrees that the web is the future of mobile. Apps are dead, except for our users. And despite the fact that it's inconvenient to us to have 3 mobile apps, our users don't care about that. They care about getting the best experience they can. And if we can't provide that to them, they'll find someone who can. I'm very much of the opinion apps are a permanent part of the landscape now. As much as that's inconvenient for us to have to build apps, it's just part of the deal. I'm not convinced mobile websites are so dramatically easier, because it's not the same thing we built before. It's different, it's severely constrained, it's much smaller. These things are not mouse pointers. Taps are not the same as clicks. There's trade-offs here. We need to understand it. We need to go into that with our eyes open and make an honest decision here. Just because we've built web apps for 15 years does not mean we can just totally take all that skill set into building a mobile website. We need to rethink the experience. Now, it's entirely possible that the thing we want to do just can't be done in the browser. There are features that are not surfaced in the browser, at least not yet. Now, some of these probably will change. Some of these we'll get access to. The multi-touch and notifications for sure is eventually going to come to the browser. I'm not so sure I want the browser to have access to my contact book or the audio or the camera. But we'll see where that goes. There certainly are device APIs today that you can tap into. There are various levels of readiness, I should say. I want to point out, though, it's a lot harder to monetize a web asset these days. It can be done, don't get me wrong. But part of the reason why the app stores are able to extract a tax for you using them is the fact that they've already established a relationship with the customer, and they've made it very, very easy for that customer to give you money. You know, think about a random website that you would encounter. How likely are you to actually pound your credit card number into that? Do you like actively look for that? I mean, if I told you about a great app that I use right now and showed you the app, I'm like, here's the guy's website, even if it would look pretty crafty, you might go buy it. But if you just stumbled upon a random website, you're probably not gonna, oh yeah, sure, this looks safe. This is a very important part of the app ecosystem. This is why they get their 30%. Now, discoverability is hard, period. You know, we've got 1 million+ apps in both app stores, we've got billions and billions of websites. I think it's actually a lot harder to find somebody on the web, because at least with the app stores, you can say, you know, find me something like Angry Birds. You know, and with the various sort of lists and reviews and whatnot, you know, the related kind of things, you can find things that are similar. Where does that exist on the web? I mean, I guess you could Google like something like Angry Birds, but I don't know what that would return. Now, if you have an established franchise, if you're something like, I guess these guys are not called Basecamp, if you already have an existing relationship, this is not as much of an issue. But there's a pretty decent chance your customers expect you to have an app. And they probably go to the App Store, type in your company name, and expect to find something. If it's not there, what does that say about your company? At the end of the day, guys, there's trade-offs here. You know, there's no right or wrong answer. It's what makes sense for you. What are the constraints you're under? You just got to kind of work through it. You could argue that almost all of these apps are web anyway, because they're all being fed from JSON. Most of them, I guess. It's all webby in the back end. And certainly a lot of native apps could be written as HTML5. It's the should part that's interesting. Now, I would argue it boils down to what are we trying to do with it? What is the goal? If the app is the revenue stream, that pushes us more towards native. If the app is an adjunct to our revenue stream, that can push us more towards hybrid or web. It just depends. Now, there was a lot of argument about publishers not really liking apps. And I think Financial Times was one of the first to kind of pull out of that ecosystem and do it their own way. And you know, a couple of publishers have been mildly successful with that. Some would argue they just did it the wrong way, that maybe there are other ways you can get your customers. I do think it's important to understand, though, if you're going to build an Android app, it should look like an Android app. If you're going to build an iOS app, it should look like an iOS app. And just because you have a successful one on one platform, you don't just take that and slap it on the other. It won't look right. You need to design for the platform that you're deploying to. Otherwise, people get mad at you. If you are going to build a web app, just build a web app then. Follow the grammar of the web, follow the design interaction techniques of the web, and go with that. As soon as we try to make the web look like native apps, that tends to end very badly for us. Now, regardless of how you choose to deliver the experience, the important thing here is for us to take a step back and ask, all right, when our folks are in a mobile context, what is it they need to accomplish? What are the 3, 4, or 5 tasks they need to be able to do with our mobile application? The hard part here is honestly not, do we build native, do we build hybrid, do we build web? It's getting to the essence of the application, slicing a few more things down, and getting to the point where we get this intersection right. And so this is XKCD showing, here's why people come to a university website. Here's what the university website has. The only thing that carries over is the name of the school. I showed this to a friend of mine, and he laughed, and I said, what's so funny? He said, he works for the University of Texas system. And he said, we saw that when it came out, looked at our website and went, oh crap, that's us. And they completely revamped their website so they didn't fall into this. We can't get that intersection wrong. We just can't. We do and we fail. Our customers will go find somebody that gets it right. So what do we try to do with a competency center? We have a couple different ways of talking about, you know, what is this thing? Is it a competency center? Is it a center of excellence? I don't really think it matters. A big part of what we're trying to do is come up with best practices and standards. And admittedly, you know, Neil mentioned this in the keynote, yesterday's best practices are tomorrow's anti-patterns, and so you have to be very aware of that. We try to build the first ones. And so if no one's ever done this before, let's at least have some example code so they're not starting at zero. A big part of the job is evangelism. A big part of it's getting out there and telling the story and telling the story again. We do a lot of internal consulting. And so I run a couple of mobile projects this year. I'm not sitting there cracking away at code, but I'm helping them with issues as they come up. I'm guiding them through working with security to make sure that we've got the right answers there, working with networking to make sure that's all set up for them. A lot of what I focus on are what we call developer-ready activities. So we're trying to figure out the whole testing solution. What can we do there? How can we automate some of that? And so we've been focusing a lot on that. A lot of what we're trying to do is make sure that folks don't start at zero. Let's build the first one so that they can have something to leverage. A big part of it is just telling the story. It's as simple as that. It's getting out there and helping people understand why mobile matters, what we can do about it, the direction this stuff is going, and that means we do a lot of influencing. So I am the point of contact in my line of business for mobile. If you have mobile questions, if you're building something mobile, it's going to end up on my desk in some way, shape, or form. At least it's supposed to. Doesn't always, but it's supposed to. We work very closely with our infrastructure folks to make sure, do we have these things that we need in place? Are there other things that we need to have? Now, when we first started kind of down this road several years ago, there were some folks who very much wanted to build this ginormous document. And I was in one meeting where someone said, well, I think the important thing is we need to define the word mobile. And I thought, really? Defining the word mobile? I don't think that's terribly meaningful. I think, that's fine if you got to give some senior vice president a PowerPoint deck. But I think these are some issues we really need to worry about. Let's try to focus our attention on those. So we're trying to be a lot more agile, or as Alan would say, flexible in terms of our strategy here. Because I guarantee you it will change. And this is a big part of what we're trying to be prepared for is, all right, new device, what do we do about it? How do we make sure people are ready for that? That's why we've got the cheat sheets. Okay, we got to target a watch. All right, what's that look like? Let's get a watch in here and start playing with it and see if we can figure out, what even makes sense to deploy to that. I hate to bring this up. I mean, this is like a four-letter word where I come from. So we're right in the middle of what are called the midterm elections. So every single congressman is up for re-election this year, and about a third of the Senate. But since it's not a presidential election year, basically nobody cares. But it does have ramifications. So what you end up seeing, at least if you're in a moderately competitive district, is all sorts of very, very nasty advertisements. For is it that bloodthirsty here in the UK? I mean, have you guys ever even seen some of the political ads people put out? I mean, it is like 30 seconds of borderline. Did you know that the guy I'm running against kills kittens and murders babies in the street? It's like, okay, I think that might be a little extreme. They always flash little things in there like the where they get the quote. In fact, it has actually spawned. It's so bad. There are fact checkers. There's like the truthometers basically. Or one I think it's the Washington Post calls it the Pinocchios. So how many Pinocchios do you give that ad? 1 Pinocchio, 2 Pinocchios, 4 Pinocchios, and they'll actually go through and like totally false, sliver of truth. I wish this stuff was all about technology, guys. I really do. It's not. It just isn't. I'm sorry. A lot of this stuff boils down to relationships. It boils down to people that play golf with each other, people that go out to fancy dinners, and they're influenced by things that we're not really pertinent to. You got to do some stakeholder analysis. So you need to take a step back and say, all right, what's important to these folks? I picked up pretty early on that we've got one group, an organization that's trying to control everything in the mobile space. They've got a lot of political power. So I can't, as much as I like to sort of try to shut them out, I can't. I have to work very closely with them, keep them in the loop on things. I've developed a lot of relationships with people on that team, because that's what I need to do to kind of keep the wheels moving on my project. I don't necessarily love that part of my job, but it's an important part of my job. So you got to understand their backgrounds. You got to understand what their concerns are, what wakes them up in the middle of the night. What are they influenced by? Who are they influenced by? I can't directly talk to my CIO, but I can influence people who can. One of the most important things for your career in software is being able to influence the influencers. It's a subtle thing. This group that I have to work with on a pretty regular basis, that CIO, she wouldn't be able to pick me out of a room. If she walked in this room right now, she would not recognize that I work at the company she worked at. But one of her direct reports used to be my boss. And so I can pick up the phone and talk to Jeff, and Jeff can go talk to her. Very important. Now, the other thing you gotta remember, guys, you gotta put on your pointy-haired boss hat every so often. We come along and say, hey, I wanna go play around with Swift. I just saw a talk at this really great conference on Swift. I think it'd be really fun. And your manager doesn't hear that. Your manager just has this explosion going off in their head. They're very concerned about this because you've now introduced risk. So we gotta be honest, well, is this actually risky? So you gotta be a Boy Scout. You gotta put on your own Boy Scout sash, and you gotta be prepared. You gotta be able to go in and say, all right, I know why you think this is risky, here's why it's not. Here's what I'm gonna do to mitigate that. Yes, I know we've never done anything in Swift before, but here's what I'm gonna do to make sure that's not a problem. We're gonna bring in a contractor to help us for the first 2 months. We've got some training lined up for the team. We've got some books already on order. We've got a whole bunch of things ready to roll. Steve's been playing with it on his own time. We already sent some guys to a conference. They went to a Swift session. They did a workshop, and we're ready to roll. Technology is easy. Culture is hard. Culture is hard. Culture is where good ideas go to die. I hate to say it. We're flawed creatures. We're irrational creatures. And sometimes, guys, you have to take a step back and say, all right, is there actually an appetite for what I'm selling? Sadly, the answer might be no. You need to be aware of that. It is part of the deal. All right, so to wrap this up, guys, mobile's here. There's no denying that. There's no avoiding that. It is just become a bigger and bigger part of our worlds as we progress. Are you ready for that? If you're not, are your competitors? What does it mean for you if you are and you aren't and they are? Hopefully it's vice versa. Good luck. Questions, comments, leaders, queries? Got cold in this room, didn't it? Jeez, we went from like an oven to a freezer in like 130 to 190-minute session. I apologize for that, Bella. Well, guys, thank you so much. I hope you had a good conference. You guys enjoy yourselves? Outstanding. That's what we like to hear. The feeling in your backside should return in a day or two. You know, no conference center on earth actually has comfortable chairs. I think that's like a design flaw. But you got to remember the #1 requirement for them is stacking the chairs, not your comfort level. And so get some sleep, get some rest. I hope you had a good time, and I hope to see you next year. Thank you.